Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Janette Hughes and I'm a Canada Research Chair at Ontario Tech University in Ontario, Canada. I'm the director of the STEAM 3D Maker Lab, so when we have cocktails later, if you want to talk making, I would love to talk to you about that. I'm going to be the moderator for our next two presentations. So we have Laura, I see Laura's online with us, Laura McBain, and Karen Teixeira, I had to practice that. And we're going to start with Karen's presentation. She's a psychologist gaining her PhD in psychological assessment at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil. And she works as a research manager at the EduLab 21, Science Laboratory for Education at the Ayrton Senna Institute. And I'll just introduce Laura while I'm doing the introductions. Laura is a designer and educator and serves as the managing director of the Stanford D School and the co-director of the K-12 Lab. Her work focuses on how human-centered design can be used to provide equitable and innovative educational experiences that will help all students thrive in a changing world. And having conversations just now with Karen, we're going to be talking about a lot of the themes that have already been talked about throughout the day. And I think what we'll do, because it's late in the day, is after we hear from both speakers, we'll do a little group activity just to get a little bit more energy back in the room. So I will turn it over first to Karen, and please help me welcome her.
Thank you, Janette, for the introduction. And before I start talking about teacher professional learning in Brazil, I would like to present the work that we do at the Institute. So how can I pass the slides? Okay. Thank you. Our mission is to create opportunity for development based on comprehensive learning, comprehensive development, and that every human being could reach their full potential. So through that, we do scientific research, we produce knowledge, and innovative knowledge and evidence-based. We produce large-scale educational solutions, like we train teachers, we prepare pedagogic materials, and we also do advocacy. We advocate for comprehensive education, working in a network together with the whole society, so researchers, teachers, managers, and business partners, and so on, to improve Brazilian education and reduce inequalities. In 20 years of the Institute, we reached more than 36 million of people we impacted in more than 3,000 municipalities in every state of Brazil. So only in 2022, we were at 27 states, more than 3,000 municipalities and 6,000 schools. In 2022, we trained almost 60,000 teachers and impacted more than 2 million students. We also have a creativity and critical thinking project in our portfolio. So we started implementing the research with the OECD in Chapecó, that is a city in the south of Brazil, and we did this implementation between 2015 and 17. And we have been doing research about intelligence, creativity, and critical thinking to base the development of materials and content to support implementation in the educational networks. We also built rubrics to perform formative assessment of the students. And we also prepared a self-instructional course that is called CPC, like Creativity and Critical Thinking at School. And in 2020, we did an international seminar to advocate for the team. And in 2024, we are going to launch a book that we prepared. And it's called Education on the 21st Century, Intelligence, Critical Thinking, and Creativity, from which the Institute is one of the organizers, together with Ricardo Primi, Tatiana Nakano, Kevin McGrew, and Joel Schneider. I will not detain myself so much in this slide, but only for you to know a little about the Brazilian teachers' profile. We have something like 2 million teachers, educators in basic education, and most of them are teaching at public schools, like you can see at the left of my slide. Almost 70% of them are women, 40% are in their 40s, 50% are Black, Pardo, or Indigenous, and 70% have 10 or more years of teaching experience. And the percentage of teachers with higher education, it's from 90 to 97%, but when we consider only licensed teachers, that are teachers who are prepared from teaching since the college, this percentage reduces a little. So the main challenges for developing creativity in the classroom in Brazil, according to the literature, is that teachers do not have a clear idea about what creativity is. If you ask a Brazilian teacher what creativity is, they will emphasize the cognitive aspects of the construct. And also they have some beliefs that creativity can be developed or taught, and it depends only on interpersonal and innate factors. And a product of these beliefs is that teachers do not feel responsible for developing creativity and critical thinking in school, and they don't seek for knowledge and best practices to do it on school. They have difficulty in recognizing what behaviors are associated with being creative in the classroom, and all of these things are really related to the fact that it doesn't have a clear idea what creativity is in terms of concept. Also, the research related a certain discrepancy between perceptions of teachers and students about teachers' postures and actions. So teachers see themselves as dynamic, motivating, highly creative teachers, but the students see teachers as monotonous. So these perceptions are really discrepant. So, and the only point in these perceptions that are more like a consensus is the use of humor in the classroom from the teachers to teach. So the both teachers and students have the same perception. And these discrepancies and teachers thinking that they are highly creative and motivating teachers may contribute to maintain this practice, this teacher practice as it is, and they don't see themselves like they are in need to develop their skills as creative teachers. Other point is that teachers don't feel secure to develop creativity skills in students because they fear that the student will use this learning to evaluate them, and this is also related to not having a clear idea what creativity is. And they report also the lack of abilities and difficulties with interpersonal skills, communicating skills, like adapting their language to the student's age group, controlling indiscipline, and planning classes that are more creative and diverse without compromising the content. They also report shyness, and they don't know what to do to stimulate creativity, and so the chain comes They don't know what creativity is, they don't know how to stimulate it, and this makes all the classes that are centralized in the teacher figure, like lectures and so on. And this doesn't open space to more active methodologies and forms to develop creativity in the classroom. So students aren't being able to assume a protagonist spot in classroom. The Ayrton Senna Institute performed a study in 2021 with more than 42,000 teachers from public schools of a Brazilian state. And you can see at the middle, the table at the middle, we asked them to rate from this range of important skills for teaching, which skills they consider important, very important, or extremely important. And if you see, creativity, all the percentages are high, but creativity got the less high one together with some other skills, because it's curious because in this question they could point all of the skills as important. And this could be due to social desirability and so on, but if you look at the table on the right side, we also ask them to rate this very same range of skills, but which one of them do they like to have support from the educational network to develop? But from all these skills, they only could choose 3. And creativity, only 18% of teachers said that they would like to have some support from education network to develop creativity. And this is related to what I presented before, that they don't know the importance of developing creativity, and they also think that they already creative enough, and they don't need to develop this further. And this is, we can see this also in the graph at the left. It's a score of the same teachers in creative teaching. It's a measure that we apply to the same teachers, and the score ranges from 0 to 4. And they, as you can see, they see themselves as highly creative. So all the species come together, and they don't know what creativity is, they don't know its importance, and they think they are already creative enough, and they don't feel like there's space to develop it. Some other topics or challenges that are pointed out by the Brazilian research is the educational conditions to implement creativity learning. So the lack of time and scarcity of material resources, the extension of the Brazilian program, that it's to be covered in a year. Teachers are low paid and have low recognition of its work. And there's a high number of students per class and high work overload. As you can see in the right of the slide, 50% of public teachers from primary schools and 20% of public teacher schools from high school have excessive workload levels that is characterized by having more than 300 students working 2 or 3 schools and teaching 2 or 3 cycles. Another topic is related to the students' attitude. Teachers see students' attitude as a challenge for developing creativity in the classroom. And the last topic is about public policy. So there's a lack of political awareness about teachers' importance in society, and some actions and public policies that are implemented are not interconnected. So the implementation of isolated policies makes them fragile, and it's not a thing that it's valued in all over the country. And we also raised the importance from valuing the assessment, diagnosis assessment or formative assessment of creativity and critical thinking for us to follow up these policies, for follow up programs that are designed to develop these competencies. And the other point on my slide that it's not appearing is that the lack of professional training that that approaches creativity and critical thinking. So as I was saying, in teaching training in Brazil, there's a lack of information about creativity, and these gaps can explain why teachers don't feel responsible for developing these skills in the classroom. And when they do so, they almost do it in an intuitive way, and we have to let this practice be more intentional, not intuitive. And as they do not have this formation, this training on how to foster these competences, in some cases they develop activities that are not consistent with the aim of developing creativity and critical thinking. And they don't have adequate space of exercise and reflection to think about practices, interventions, and to develop this kind of skills. And teachers are poorly prepared to help students to develop creativity, as it involves characteristics seen as undesirable. Teacher training programs only prepare teachers to deal with obedient and passive students, and the diversity and creativity it's not something that they are used to work and they know how to work in the classroom. And the teachers in training also feel that they need further development on creativity in education, research and questioning skills as a part of their professional training. So connecting all these challenges with the framework proposed by the OECD, some reflections are that this theme is a theme of great interest in Brazil, and it's a great opportunity to teachers to know in depth what creativity and critical thinking are, and to demystify some of the beliefs they have, like their innate skills and so on. And the structure and content meet the training needs of teachers. Although it's extremely relevant, 99 hours seems unfeasible given the teacher's limited time. We already discussed this before. And we have the accelerated version of this framework. But we raised that subject only to suggest maybe that we could have like a decision-making tree of the training paths, like depending on teacher's need or time or another type of constraint, we can choose one path or another, and depends on who is demanding this training program for teachers. Is it the teacher themselves? Is it the educational network? Who is demanding it? And so maybe it's something nice to have different paths to be chosen by the teachers. One difficulty in Brazil is that it's difficult to gain scale by training them in person by facilitators. It's the dream of training programs, but maybe with all this complexity, we can think about diversifying the strategies and using also online synchronous training and self-instructional online courses. And to finalize my talk, one point that is very important to Brazil, and I don't know if you have this kind of importance in your country as well, but for teachers to progress in their career, they have like a system of points, and every time they do a course or a training program, they earn some points that help them to progress in their career and reflects on their income as well. So preparing and generating participant certification accepted for career progression is something that will be very valuable in Brazil. If it not possible, maybe this will decrease the likelihood that teachers could do the course and the training program and enjoy all of this content. So it's something for us to think about it. This is our website, and through this QR code you can access it if you want to have further information. And I would like to thank you for your attention and apologize for my bad English. And I'm at your disposal if you wanted to know more about the Institute and make partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I was sitting here wondering, because I think I'm a pretty creative teacher, how many of my students think I'm monotonous. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the themes you touched on, but I want to make sure Laura gets a chance to get her full time in. So we'll hear from you next, Laura. Welcome. Please help join me in welcoming Laura.
Well, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually calling in from California, Palo Alto, California, and it is Thanksgiving here in the United States today. And there are a lot of traditions with Thanksgiving around the United States. Some of them involve eating a lot of pie and turkey and being with family and friends. Some involve playing the American football out in the fields. But I think my favorite tradition around Thanksgiving is gratitude. And so I just want to start this by saying, expressing a lot of gratitude to my colleagues, Cassie on Zoom here, Federico, Stefan, Andreas from the OECD for making this event happen. And of course, to my founders, Bill and Frankie and Dan and Michael and Mark and Pam and Vlad and Idris, everyone on the Global Institute Learning Team for really making this event happen. Last week, I was supposed to be with you all in person, and I sprained my ankle pretty severely. And so there was a really quick change up in the agenda. And I just want to thank all of you for Zooming with me and my folks on Zoom. Good afternoon, good evening. And obrigada to my friend Karen in Brazil. Thank you for sharing the context in Brazil. And so as Janette said, thank you. I am one of the last presenters that is keeping you from either an interactive event or what I imagine will be a reception later. So I know that I'm holding you from that. So I'm going to do my best to be succinct and share in about 15 minutes. But I do want to share as we get started that I am a designer. I am not a traditional researcher. And so what I'm going to share in a minute is just how we think about this context through a design lens. And as a designer, and as Janette, thank you, shared, I am a designer at the Stanford D School. I've also been a principal and a teacher. I co-founded a co-founding teacher of a school called High Tech High that was really around inculcating creativity in the classroom through project-based learning. And so I've spent a lot of time on the ground with teachers thinking about how they reimagine their classroom, their systems, and their structures to not just teach creativity, but to use creativity to radically reimagine a better system that serves more young people in the world and in the United States. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope it gives it a go. We'll see how Zoom does. And I'm sure my colleagues on Zoom or Cassie will tell me if it's not working, but we'll start from here. And let's see if we can see it. Let's make sure we've got it all. All right, Cassie, if you don't have it, let me know. Cassie, you'll shoot me a text or give me a thumbs up. I think we should be okay. Great, thanks, Cassie. So yeah, the title of my talk here today is really about cultivating creativity in the U.S. context. And I work at the Stanford D School. And the D School does two things. Since 2005, we have been cultivating the creative confidence of students through our master's program in design impact, our undergraduate program in product design, and through our professional learning studio that works with professionals in education, executive education, nonprofit, for-profit, to really think about how they can use the power of design to make a real change in the world. And we do that through offerings, and we also do that through publications. One of our big beliefs is that design and creative tools should be accessible to everyone. That means either in person, online, open source, using very simple materials so that everyone can have it. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what we call the design context in the United States. As Bill might have shared today, or even last year, I remember him saying that one of the most challenging things about scaling or bringing creativity to the United States is that it is not a monolith. I get jealous when I hear my friend Michael in the room talk about Australia or some folks in the UK where there's one Ministry of Education. In the United States, that is not the context. We have 50 plus states that are all operating very independently. And so when I look at this, just by the sheer numbers, there's over 130,000 public schools in the United States, all with a different agenda about how they teach. We have 30,000 private schools that actually don't have to teach how the government decides how they want to teach it. And we've got 13,000, roughly 500 public school districts that are run by school boards and by localities who decide the learning agenda. So even as we put out a policy internationally or nationally, getting the uptick from those particular entities is quite challenging because they already have things going on. On top of that, we've got roughly a little over 3 million public school teachers in the United States and about 500,000 in private schools. And they are working in lots of different contexts, from schools like here in Palo Alto that are, filled with resources, to schools that are on the south side of Chicago that may not even have infrastructure for Wi-Fi. Radically different context. And then, of course, we're looking at about 49 million students in public schools and another 5 million in the private schools. So we're talking about a massive number of people all operating in very distinct, diffused ways. And so when we think about, or when I think about, how do we help everyone, and particularly more teachers and young people, embrace the creative confidence that they have, one approach is not always the case. How do we think about it in different ways? And so today I want to talk a little bit about what we call kind of many ways to many, which was developed by Joe McCannon and some others at the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is how do we get to scale in different ways? And so I just want to share a little bit about the context that's happening in the United States right now in public schools. By the headlines is, post-COVID, we have seen a massive moment where we have teachers leaving. Vacancies. I think our colleague Linda Darling-Hammond through the Learning Policy Institute stated that 1 in 10 teachers are leaving the profession. And the schools that are being most hardly hit are those probably most that are like underserved or historically underinvested. So we're seeing not just teachers in the school needing resources, but we're seeing actually no teachers in the classroom. We're also seeing, and I'm sure this will come up, and I'm coming up today or tomorrow with Stefan, is artificial intelligence. We have seen a rapid uptick with artificial intelligence. I have some former students that work at OpenAI, and if you're familiar with ChatGPT or all the other new cool stuff that's happening, we're seeing not just an uptick of how do we use this in schools, how do we teach it, and then how does it intersect with social emotional learning and the role of a teacher right now. This is an inflection moment that we're noticing in schools that's connected to how do we teach. And then lastly, what we're really seeing in the last couple of years is that, the educational system in the United States is actually being eroded. COVID revealed many inequities within our system. And we're seeing a massive revolt, if you will, about what education needs to be and what it should be, particularly for the students who are most underserved. And so this is the context that the United States is swimming in. Is my colleague Karen over there talked about scaling. And when we think about the US, not only are we talking about numbers, we're talking about the shifts in the context that we live in within the context of the United States. So I wanted to start with that. because I think it's important for when we think about scaling creativity, it is not a static system. It is a dynamic, diffuse system in the United States that not only is challenging by number, but challenging by the context and the political system that we live in. And so for me, the big design challenge, and not surprising for those in my room who love design, it's a how might we, how might we support the ability of US educators to cultivate the critical and creative thinking skills of their students, for all students, but particularly for students who have been underinvested or underseen within our system. That is the question that I think about a lot. And it's the work that I've been doing with my colleague, Mark Shun, who's in the room, through Deeper Learning and through the Stanford D School. And so what we've uncovered, I think, is really some needs. And I think Karin got at some of them, but I want to share just some simple needs that we have uncovered, not just through the research that we've done, but through the practical on the ground field work that we've done with teachers. And we see, a simple number of needs. One is who? What we've realized is educators need a supportive network dedicated to their professional development. They need a community of practice. They need people who will not only give them resources, but support them in real time or on demand in ways that support their creative thinking and critical thinking skills and facilitation in just-in-time learning. So when they make a mistake, they have a group of people to refer back to that they can support them, that can love them, and actually help them move on, so that when they face their first failure, they have a support network. We realize that is really important for educators, particularly in our diffuse context. What? As Karin said, educators need a lot of examples. They're asking how. And part of the how is really thinking about really simple, easy to implement activities that really build not only their students' creative confidence, but their own. And often when we think about teaching, when I think about this, we're talking short, 30 minutes, 1 week, short lessons that they can do in a short amount of time to build their confidence as they go, not a month-long or year-long project. Short things so they can start seeing how creativity and critical thinking is not a domain-specific activity, but part of how we learn as an individual and as a human. They want to see how it flows through all of their work. Where is that one of the big things, not surprising in the United States, is that one model or one example does not fit all. Our educators in the United States lead lots of examples, a lot of great activities that not only meet their local context, but their students' interest. Teaching students, obviously in Southern San Diego versus New York is quite different. The context in which they live are quite different. And so ensuring that the examples that we have of how to do this meets not just the needs of our students, but really gets at what students' interest, making sure that the learning that they're doing around creativity is actually authentic to the things that students want to learn about, because creativity and curiosity are connected. And so how do we make sure that the activities that we're designing with our young people spark their creativity, but spark their curiosity to learn more? And then one thing in the United States, and I'm sure this might be true in other places, is they need time. The school day is very intense. They might get 30 minutes of prep. My sister is an AP chemistry teacher, and she told me yesterday that literally she has no time in her classroom for planning because kids are in there every single hour of the day. She has no time. So how do we do that to give people time to invent, to collaborate, and reflect with others? And then lastly, and I think this is a lot of the stuff that's been coming up, is, there is a question about creativity in the United States, particularly about what type we're teaching and why. And I think in the United States, teachers need a little bit of political cover to try new curriculum activities. If they don't teach from the book, what's going to happen when they fray from that or when they diverge from that? How do they get support from leadership, from policy, from districts to ensure that as they're trying these new things, it is okay? I'm getting a chat. Okay, thanks. Thank you. And then So how do we do this? How do we meet these needs at scale? And so I wanted to share a few lessons that my colleague Mark, who's in the room, and of course my colleagues here at Stanford have been thinking about, of how we've approached the US context and thinking about how we scale creative practices in schools. And so for those of you who are familiar with design, this will look pretty familiar. For those who not, this is what we call a 2x2, multiple ways of thinking about an issue. And so what you see on the screen is basically two different axes. On the one axis, or on the Y axis, if you will, for my mathematically inclined folks, we think about how reach. We think about how many people are really at scale. If we were to get every young person in the United States to do this, that's great. And on the low side, it's like it doesn't reach that many people. It's really not at scale. And on the x-axis, or the middle, folks, we see, is this school-wide? Is it not just something that's happening in one classroom or one teacher, but is it part of the entire system? Does professional development, do the walls of the school, does the policy really promote critical and creative thinking in schools? Which means often breaking a lot of rules and assuming that the rules might be wrong. And so a lot of that is that. And then of course on the left side is isolated as small ways that may not permeate through a system or a classroom, but are small ways for teachers to think about. And so I want to share a couple examples about how we've been thinking about this context in the United States. And the first one, and this gets at, I think, what Karin is also mentioning, one of the needs, is that this idea of community of practice, or bright spots, as defined by Dan Heath in his book. And so when we were scaling deeper learning, one of the very first things that we did was create a community of practice, or COP for short. And it was a connection of 10 schools that were doing deeper learning creative practices at scale within their network. You know, hundreds of schools. Now, again, when you think about the context, even hundreds of schools does not meet the entire need of the United States. They were bright spots, they were pillars, they were lighthouses of what's possible. We were able to really show good examples, but how you take that great example that's at full scale and reach more people or help people get started is quite challenging. And so another thing that we worked on, or I've worked on, is what we call individual acts, or quick wins. For those who think about failure, it's an opportunity to test and to try. And there are a lot of ways we've been trying to do this. One is through we call Stoke decks, which are basically 5-minute short activities to help people unlock their creativity. And they might be classroom activities. I could do one with you today if I wanted to in a few minutes, but it's a way to start building a mindset, not a lesson plan, that cultivates this concept of what it means to be creative. We've taken that deck and moved into what we call creative acts for curious people. I think my colleagues Frankie and Bill have a copy of this, but they are full. And I think Stefan, I gave this to him when he came to the D School, is these are lessons, a little farther lessons that allow people to take a piece of creativity and start to think about what does that look like in a classroom, in a lesson plan setting. And then lastly, you know, we've also had some success thinking about how we get people. One way to do that is a campaign. Through my work at High Tech High, we had what we call a Share Your Learning campaign. And we reached about 1 million people. And through that, we essentially asked folks to do one thing. They were presentations of learning, they were student learning conferences, they were really specific ways for people to actually share their creativity and their deeper learning with others. And we reached about 1 million people. The great part of that, of course, is that we reached so many people. The challenge with that is not everything was at quality. Not everything was perfect. Not everything was a bright spot or an exemplar. There were attempts for schools to do that. So we reached a lot of people, but the fidelity might have been mixed. And then for those of you who are familiar with the design process here, you know, as I said, the D School has been doing design since 2005. And shortly after we started, for better or worse, a process called the design thinking process scaled from us. And we've reached millions of people through this. And again, good and bad, we have schools of design that have popped up. We've got design thinking programs all over the globe. I believe our starter kit, when it first came out a couple years, like probably about 10 years ago, I think it's at like 11 million people globally. Our new starter kit, I think, is roughly about 15,000 downloads where people are training the trainer, and we're reaching hundreds of thousands of people. The great part about that is that we're getting high reach. The challenge is, like, we know that design, just like creativity, is localized, and facilitation of that is not just having a lesson plan, but the unique facilitation that a teacher brings to that room. And so just doing a short exercise or a quick workshop may not make you a designer, but it will introduce you to how to do it. And so the question that many have asked, and I think a lot of us in this room, is how do we get here? How do we get to this bullseye moment where we see full scale and almost every young person doing this? And I think as we've learned recently, I think in the last number of years, is that, like, this is actually may not be attainable. And this might be depressing for some folks in the room, but this question of, like, is the assumption that we're trying to get as many people as possible full scale? Another way to think about how we get to this moment is not by having this silver bullet of high reach and full scale, but instead having many ways to get there. Many different ways and many approaches that allow people to meet this in their context. We think this might be the way, actually, to start thinking about high reach, knowing that each context in the United States is quite different. Each community resources are quite different. And so the capacity, the idea that we are going to have a monolith high reach in the United States is a misnomer. We probably can't do that. But what we can do is find lots of ways to approach it. And so the question, I think all of us, I think in this room, and I think over the last 2 days, is how might we use the new OECD framework support more teachers to foster creative and critical thinking, right? And so what might be, for us, what might be the many ways to meet the diffuse, diverse U.S. context? Do we do more community practices? Do we more have exemplars? Do we try to get an online program? These are the questions that we're wrestling with in the United States. And these are the design questions that, as designers and educators, we need to embrace. And so for me, this is a movement. And it's not one act, but it might be many ways to many. And as a designer, to get me started and to get you started, I think about questions like this, like, how might we use generative AI to support this quest, to support teachers? What is the role that AI can play for now? How might we use social media platforms to share powerful stories? Right now, I'm really curious about what is the Netflix version of this? How do we get more stories out there so that we can see and actually show what this looks like in really robust and beautiful and nuanced ways? Those are platforms. How might we activate parents to disrupt an antiquated and, I would say, historically inequitable system? What is the role that parents can play? Today, we've been talking a lot about, obviously the system and teachers and students, but I think parents have a huge role to play here of how we disrupt. And of course, students. You'll see some examples of student case studies tomorrow. And I think our job for young people is to really unlock their creative capacity to make change. So how do we move from a case study or a project to I am creative all the time? And I can do that in every domain because that is how I think and how I act in the world. And so as you kind of go off to break, Janette, I didn't know you were going to take a break, but here's a question for everybody, is how might you use X to do X? We like to call those Mad Libs or brainstorms. But I want us to think about what are the novel and creative ways. If we are going to scale creativity, we must do it in novel and creative ways. It can't be used the same way. So how might we use radical tools to really scale and foster teachers? What are the new ways that we can get there? And I think one thing that's true in the United States is that the old ways or the ways that we've been working aren't working anymore. So we need to find new, novel approaches to scaling creativity. And so lastly, I believe we really need to imagine and build novel approaches to really support more teachers in culture responsive ways that enable them to embrace and what I think we're calling the creative revolution. This is not a call to like do a lesson plan. This is a call of action to change the world. And I'm sure if Andre spoke this morning, I'm sure he did, it was about the need for creativity to not just help our young people, but to actually make a better planet. We're facing climate change, AI, all of these big challenges require complex, critical, and creative people to address them. So I think for me, I think our students and the world is waiting for everyone on this call and everyone at this conference to embrace the new framework and think about how do they get there in their own context. And I think that's it. That's my time, and stay in touch and feel free to reach out to me for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm wondering if you could put your question slide back up, because I think that would be the perfect way to end this session, is to look at those questions and have people talk with each other. Choose one, perhaps, and take a stab at answering one of those questions. And Laura, you'll be happy to know that your the Stanford D School has been quite influential in my own work. I've been to High Tech High and I've seen the great things that are happening there. And I've also been using the your design thinking graphic, but I've been looking at the liberatory design as well, which is something that I think is fairly new that's come out of your lab as well. So I would love to continue the conversation with you personally, but let's take a few minutes we only have about 9 minutes, so let's maybe take 5 minutes for you to talk with 2 or 3 people that are around you, maybe somebody different from earlier today, and address one of these questions, and then we'll just spend a few minutes to see if anybody wants to share at the end. Okay, I'm going to ask you to, we're going to ask you to come back to the main group. Just wanted to return your focus. I know you didn't have a lot of time to discuss that. We have less than 3 minutes, so I thought we would just wrap it up. Does anybody want to share anything that they were discussing? I think Karen and Laura did a wonderful job talking about the challenges and constraints we're all facing, our teachers face in particular, and certainly the challenge of AI. Yeah, I see a name tag up. I can't see.
Sorry, me again. I was really excited to see that third question. How might we activate parents to disrupt an antiquated system? Because I started STEAMCO to help connect kids with their art and communities with their schools, because I believe it takes a whole village to inspire a child. There is so much talent latent in our communities, but I had a rude awakening when I went to a school in Darlington in the north of England, a very socially deprived working class community, and the head teacher said, I can't even get 6 parents cleared by the police service, DBS, to come and work in my school. You don't know how lucky you are in your middle-class school down there in London. And I believe it's the greatest opportunity, yet one of the biggest challenges, engaging parental and wider community in schools, even business. I've had Google, Barclays come and work with me. American companies want 15,000 pages of paperwork and waivers before their staff will come in. It's complex at every level, yet I believe is an aspect of the Holy Grail for changing and transforming education. So that's more of a statement than a question, sorry.
Thank you. Laura, did you want to respond to that, or do you have a comment?
I'm already jumping in on the chat. I love someone else is thinking about like, how do we use AI? I think Keelan on the chat is like, how do we use AI to spark creativity with young people? I mean, I think that's right. I think part of one of the, I will say, and thank you, Janette, for like the shout out on design and High Tech High. I mean, one of the things that we really pushed, particularly when we were starting those schools, is actually really creating a strong parent learning arc. And I think the question that I really appreciate, and I didn't get quite your name, I think, but thank you for sharing, is the question that I think we initially had is like, if I learn this way, so, and I did okay, so why would we change it? right? This question, we used to do it this way. We've always done it this way. So like, why would we possibly change if I've been relatively successful? I actually think that challenge is actually more prevalent in actually highly successful schools, particularly high income, et cetera. And so your question is spot on. And I think part of what we have been doing, or we've done, you know, when I was working as a principal, is having learning questions. The same type of experiences that we're designing for teachers through the framework can actually be applied to parent education networks. It's the same framework. It's the same thing, because partly what we want to do is actually recognize with parents that are leading their young people that they too need creativity and critical thinking in their workplaces and in their lives. And so the framework that we have, and I congrats to like Stefan and Casey and Federico for designing this, is that I actually think that has applicability not just for students and teachers, but for parent or learning organizations. And so I would actually start there, is how do we start using some of these activities with parent education networks, with your PTAs, we call in the United States, and start bringing them in, because once people start understanding what it is and how it works, it not only be useful to change the system, but actually useful for them. And I think that's part of the challenge we're under. I hope that's okay, but feel free to follow up. Yeah.
So Stefan told me that we could have a few minutes, we could borrow a few minutes from the next session if there were any other, so I see Hillary, yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. Could I ask about the culture wars in the USA, in states like Florida, Texas, and so on, and how that is impacting on the drive for creativity in education?
Thank you. You hit on a topic, didn't you? That's the thing. I mean, that's part of, I think that's the political cover we're talking about. I think within school boards in particular, which are publicly elected officials, just to name that as a context, is they're challenging. I think one of the areas that we're noticing is what we call book banning. We're seeing that across the United States, not just in Florida, but across places. And so I think one of the challenges that we're noticing, or we're seeing book banning, or what they call CRT, critical race theory, is coming up not just in K-12, but in higher ed. And one of the things that I think we're challenged by, I think, is not only a lack of understanding about what this work is around either CRT or creativity, but I think a lack of empathy, actually. One of the areas that I work on is futures literacy, which is how do we help young people and educators see themselves as futurists? And one of the areas that we're working on is how do we actually seek visions of coexistence in communities? This idea of binary right or wrong, I don't think will get us very far. I mean, I know I can't answer this question. It's a really tough. I wish I'd answer like how to approach this, but they're getting pretty intense, to name it simply. And I think we need a better approach that actually leads with a lot more empathy and a lot more understanding and a lot more nuance. The Better Arguments project, that is a project that is out of the Aspen Institute. They talk about building a better argument. And I think that's a really crucial aspect that's happening in the United States, is that we demonize, the wrong or the other person without seeing that we're all here trying to build together. The Better Arguments project, feel free to Google it. It's actually middle school resources to help young people think more complex, more creatively, and more with a lot more complexity about some of these really deep issues. Anyway, I wish I was there in person to give you the full rundown of all that complexity, but it's happening, and I think we need new approaches.
Thanks, Laura. I see two more nameplates up, and I think we'll take those two and then we'll finish. So over here at the back.
One of the things that our group kind of came up to, responding to both speakers actually, is thinking about how systems can provide support for creativity learning without actually trying to control creativity learning. And one of the comments was that we seem to see rollouts that are really more about control than they are about support. So frameworks such as Laura's, I think, are really useful to create a common vocabulary and then to empower local contexts to do their own contextualisation and their own work, rather than setting up this kind of command and control curriculum approach. And I think there's a lot to being able to allow teachers to be professional and school leaders to be professional about the way they contextualise, understand and implement in their own context, rather than kind of pushing a really kind of constricted way of thinking about learning and teaching through, you know, documents or whatever. But anyway, that was just one thing that I was inspired, and we were inspired to talk about after both of those presentations.
Thank you so much. And the last comment, yeah, there, thanks.
Thank you so much. So after our conversation about this subject, we identify a new challenge, for example, with the social media, with the social networks. For example, when you look for the TikTok, we have a problem because sometimes the kids, they only take attention for 8 or 9 seconds. So the problem is the concentration economy. So sometimes they use the time as an economy, don't spend many times. So our challenge is how to change the attention to concentration. How to change attention to concentration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And final word?
No, I also had a question for Karen, actually, on you mentioned that, you know, one way that would make, you know, the kind of framework we've been designing interesting in Brazil was if it could be part of the official certificates for teachers. So what would that take? So what does it mean, you know, to be
I don't know the process very well, but I think maybe it has to be submitted to the Ministry of Education. So like having a certificate from them to use the program as a reference for teachers training programs. And I think it's something like that, to have like a seal that certificates you like a valid program to teacher training.
Thanks, everyone. I'm definitely going to be in touch with both of you. And let's thank them for their presentations and their time. Back to your turkey.
Thanks.